In light of that, do we recommend the King James Bible, Mark? Do we encourage people to read this? Someone asked me this last Sunday in what translation they should get, a newer believer. And it was the one that came to the forefront of their mind. They said, well, I have a King James. I'll tell you what I said. What do you say in those kinds of moments? If that is the Bible that they currently possess.
It does really depend on who's asking me and why. If someone is asking me, should I include the King James in my regular rotation of Bibles that I read or check in study, I'd say absolutely, go for it. In fact, please do it, because the King James is the leading example of the Tyndale tradition. And you're just not going to understand the implicit dialogue among translations, the conversation over how do we handle certain difficult passages, unless you look at the one ring that has ruled them all for all these decades. A little aside here, I read the story of the formation of the New International Version, which happened back in the 60s. And the author, John Steck, who was one of the translators, said, we all grew up on the King James, and we found it incredibly difficult to kind of get out of its shadow and try to think, what is the best way to communicate this particular verse now in current English? I think that's a good reason to pick up the King James and use it in your study. However, if it's a new believer saying, what translation should I read for the first time? If it's even somebody who is, a teenager in the Lord, as it were, an adolescent, and not gotten around the block very many times, there's just no way I'm going to recommend that they use the King James and read through it this year. They're not entirely different, but at every place where they differ, potential misunderstandings or lack of understanding will occur. And the point of reading a translation is understanding what God said in the Hebrew and Greek as best you can. So why would I recommend that you face this unnecessary difficulty added on to the difficulty that's already present in the Bible? Peter said, there are some things, Paul wrote that in the King James, he says, are hard to be understood. Well, that's absolutely true. And it's already hard enough. Why would we add this added difficulty, unnecessary difficulty of getting past archaic language? I think the answer can only be tradition. And as a Protestant, as an evangelical, don't hear me saying tradition is all bad. I think there's a lot of good traditions out there. I think the King James is a good tradition. But at those places where that tradition actually runs up against what the Bible teaches, edification requires intelligibility, I have to go with the Bible against my traditional Bible translation.